without further ado, this is the presentation. This is Between Families, and the presentation is titled The Power of Stories. It's going to get serious real fast. I want you to think of a time that was traumatic when you were a young person, preferably before you were 18, 20-ish, when you were pretty young. And I want you to think of that traumatic time, and I want you to go back in your mind to that time. What did you need to get through that time? What did you need from the adults in your lives? What did you need? What did you need? And I'm just going to give you a minute to think about that. I bring this slide up. These are photos of me, but you usually see this photo when you want to think about a time when somebody had a really tough time. But this isn't what we look like when we're having a tough time, is it? What we really look like in our stories of tough times is, this was last weekend and my son had just been discharged from the hospital and I was giving a reading. This is in middle school. I didn't have a high school picture, which was a little unfortunate. I had a really tough time in high school and I had a lot of trouble with depression. This was right after I had a miscarriage. If you looked at any of these photos, you wouldn't know that though. So when you think about depression and you think about people having a tough time, I just want to change that image because it isn't this. That's how we feel, but that's not what we look like. This is what we look like. Especially in this fake booking world that we're in right now. We show all these pictures and we put a status update about how wonderful it's all going. And the truth of our narrative is much deeper than that. It's grittier than that. So what did you need? Maybe you needed sports, maybe you needed your folks, maybe you needed your brother, maybe you needed, I'm sure you needed a lot of things. Some of us think of music we needed. Some of us think of the times when we rolled down the windows and screamed along to a song. Some of us think of the artwork that pulled us out of something. Ultimately, for me, I needed stories. I needed to know, especially as a teenager, that I wasn't alone. When I felt like I was alone, there was somebody else who felt like they were not enough, they didn't have the matching clothes like the girls who sat in their class. Their hair wasn't perfect. Their nails weren't perfect. They didn't have the greatest boyfriend. They didn't have the nice car, the good grades, the perfect application. They didn't have it all. Because when we look around, we see that our friends are beautiful. We see that they're amazing. And we assume that they're okay, especially as teenagers. We don't have that perspective of truth and of grit that we get as we get older. So the way that I got that as a young person was through stories. I learned it by good narrative. And good narrative is the story we tell ourselves, and it's informed. It's gritty. It tells you, here's this character who's a real person. To go back, this person had a tough day. This person had a wonderful day. And it was a combination of both of those things. This was a day that involved laying in a hospital bed and snuggling with your child and watching him get better and having wonderful nurses. This was a day that involved some of your oldest friends coming out of the woodwork to come and support you. This was a day that you practiced. These are the real grit, real stories. And for me, that's what made those characters relatable. This is my son Magnus. And I wanted to bring this slide up because kids look different than adults when they struggle. Sometimes, like I described that he had just gotten out of the hospital. So Magnus's response to pain, if you say, Magnus, does your throat hurt? So the surgery he had, he got his tonsils and his adenoids out. And if you asked him, does your throat hurt? He will say no. But if you watch him and you put a pulse oximeter on his finger, he starts to get whiny and mean to his brother. He hits him. He doesn't want to eat. He comes up and he's mean to me. And then when I say go in timeout, he cries and he wants to be held. And if I put that pulse oximeter on him, his O2 saturation goes down and his heart rate is up. And I will tell you that is his response to pain, because children don't respond to things the same way that adults do. They don't call up, especially the same way that well-adjusted, and we hope we all are, well-adjusted adults respond to things. This is a story we've been reading in my house lately. It's called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. And the premise of the basic story is there's a dragon, and it starts out the size of a kitten, and Billy Bixby, his mom, doesn't want to admit that there's a dragon. So Billy went back to his room and began to dress. The dragon came close to Billy and wagged its tail, but Billy didn't pat it. If there's no such thing as something, it's silly to pat it on the head. So the reason I bring this up is because I think the dragon in this narrative, if we want to take it to the adult level, is the things that we ignore. And these are the things that in real life grow bigger and bigger, and that's exactly what happens in the story. By the end, he's as big as the house, and all he needed was for somebody to acknowledge him. So my background, as you heard, is that for the first years of my career, I graduated with a degree in special education, and my particular emphasis and interest was in severe emotional and behavioral problems, as well as learning disabilities. And I went to work with kids who lived in residential treatment facilities. And when I worked there, I went out a lot because I was young. And I would go out and people would say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "I work in a residential treatment facility, I'm a teacher." And they'd say, "What's that?" Every time. And I thought, how is this in your neighborhood? Because I'm at my neighborhood bar right down the street. How do you not know what this is? And so I feel like this is how these kids feel, is that their problems get bigger and bigger because they just go so unacknowledged. And I think that's also what happens to shame and fear, is that if we can't bring it into the room, we can't get it smaller. We can't make it manageable until we acknowledge it through narrative. So as soon as they pat the dragon on the head, he returns to kitten size, and they go, "I think he just wanted to be noticed." Powerful stories are those that have real characters. They have real grit. But they're also stories that are really beautiful. They have figurative language. They have things that engage us, that make us feel. So why powerful stories? Why read fiction? In 2013, an Emory University study looked at the brains of fiction readers. Researchers compared the brains of people after they read to the brains of people who didn't read. The brains of the readers showed more activities in certain areas of the brain, specifically parts of the brain associated with understanding language. The researchers also found increased connectivity in the areas that help the brain visualize movement. And the conclusion that they took from this is basically that people who read fiction in particular are more empathetic. And I would wager that the reason behind that has to do with the suspension of disbelief. If I read your memoir, if I read a nonfiction book, that is about you. It's not about me. That is your experience. And it might help me and I might relate. But I'm also going to put that in the other category, as in, it's not me. What I believe about stories and the power of narrative and powerful stories is that they help us relate, because we can see this gritty, real character who doesn't have the perfect Facebook profile, who doesn't have the best hair, nails, face, makeup, boyfriend, girlfriend, all that stuff. And I can see that I want that person to excel. I'm rooting for that person. And in that process, in putting myself in their shoes in that first person narrative, in allowing myself to pretend to be them, I allow myself to be okay. And I am able to relate to their emotions. So what are the other powers of stories? Power is that they help us be empathetic. They also teach us information. Every culture in the world uses stories to teach. We use them to teach moral lessons. Whether it's an oral culture or a written culture, it doesn't matter. That's what we do as human beings. We tell stories to learn. We also need to tell our stories to release the shame. Nothing is as toxic to your life as shame. Research fully supports that. If anybody reads Brené Brown or has watched any of her TED Talks, it's absolutely the case, and research supports that the thing that will block you from Love and belonging is feeling like you are not worthy of loving, belonging, and that stems from shame. And the way that you get through that is to bring shame, the things you are ashamed of, into light. If you can bring those things into light, they cannot exist in that light. And so when you bring them to light, you heal. People who write as little as 2 minutes per day, 2 days in a row, show health benefits for up to 6 weeks. People who spend 20 minutes a week in one study, who spent 20 minutes a week for 4 weeks, had as much as a 48% reduction in absenteeism and showed significant drops in their blood pressure. Telling stories is powerful. Now, I wanted to tell the stories of victims of abuse and neglect because what I saw was that they did not have a story. If I'm going out and nobody knows that these kids exist, then there's no story that those of us who read and spend our time informing ourselves by reading, there's nobody telling that story or they would know. And the other issue that I saw was that if nobody was telling that story, then the people who needed that story to feel normal weren't getting it. Because the thing is, it's real easy to always put the people who are making it, to put them into that other category. Well, they can make it because they're tall, they can make it because they have nice parents, they can make it because they have good friends and I'm a loser, they can make it for all these reasons that I can't. And kids in treatment, I think, probably read a lot of the stories of abuse and neglect and go, oh, but those kids found their families. They don't read the story that shows them existing in these facilities and say, there's hope for you. You have tremendous strengths. So here are some statistics. In 2013, 402,378 children were in foster care on September 30th of that year. An estimated 200,000 children right now are in residential treatment. 30% of victims of abuse have been exposed to domestic violence. And where is their story? Well, I wrote it, or I tried. Between Families, in gracious memory of the life and work of David Ramos. Part 1, Darkness and Love. Between the last dry grains of sand and the first drops of sea, between the sun's last sliver of light slipping below the horizon and the star's first winks, between the last scene in dreams and wiping sleep from weary eyes, therein lies the truth. The truth lies in between. Between the story you tell and the one your mother tells, between what a murderer remembers and a witness speaks, between being yanked out of the messy life you were born into and piecing together a new one from the scraps you beg, borrow, and steal. That's where the truth is and where the story lies, in between. Beginnings and endings are arbitrary. My story could start with my parents. He shot her in the face. When my mother was 8 months pregnant with me, my mother and father were up late fighting in their shabby one-bedroom apartment when my father held a gun to her cheek and pulled the trigger. She heard the barrel click and quickly jerked her head up and over so the bullet didn't blast through her skull and kill her. It didn't split us apart. Instead, it sliced a fine path up the bridge of her nose. It narrowly missed her eyes, singeing eyelashes on its path up her face, scraping her just beneath her right eyebrow and lodging itself in the wall behind her. But she was fine, and I was fine. He must have been a fucking horrible shot. There were only 2 signs my mom had been shot, and neither of them noticeable. One was that she had no sense of smell. If a skunk came through and sprayed, she'd be blissfully unaware. She also had a slender scar, barely there, that ran up the bridge of her nose to her eyebrow. That was it. My mom was rarely seen without her stylish sunglasses and a layer of glossy lipstick. She had lustrous red hair, very light skin, and full lips, and the combination meant you only saw the scar if you knew what you were looking for. She was beautiful. I remember sitting in our kitchen staring at the white plaster wall and wondering about that bullet. I always pictured the shooting in our apartment, even though it hadn't taken place there. I imagined my mom's refusal to give in, even with a gun to her face. People thought my mother was smooth and sultry, and she was. She dripped Southern charm, and men lapped it up. But beneath all that sweetness was a stubborn woman who was tough as nails and who couldn't be told what to do. The thick, sun-dried knuckles of my father's left hand grasped my mom's untamed hair while he held a gun to her face with his right. She looked up and stared right into his face. Unflinchingly, she held his gaze and goaded him to do it. When he didn't right away, she told him to fuck himself, so he shot her. Covered in blood at the hospital, they told her she and the baby were both fine. I'm sure they told her how lucky she'd been, how lucky we'd both been. All she knew was she'd done what she had to in order to keep me with her. She stood up to that son of a bitch, and she kept us together. My dad went to jail for trying to kill my mom. I never met him. He was already in jail when I was born. But I imagined the story often, especially two parts of the story: the shooting and right after when my mom lay in her hospital bed in Georgia. Crisp, clean sheets tucked neatly around the metal rails of a bed, and the nurses and the doctors fussing over us and saying how lucky we'd been. A kind nurse would gently touch my mother's rounded belly. "We're fine," my mother would say firmly. And my mother would glare and wish her hands away because she'd been the one who'd protected us from him. She'd touch the bandage on her face and say, "I did what I had to." She could have done nothing. She kept us together for 12 years. It could have been worse. So that's how the story starts. And I'm not going to get into the details of the abuse at the moment. I will say that it is, for those of you who have not read the book, it is very accurate. It is an authentic description of, I think, what those lives are like. It is not gratuitous. It is not to make you writhe under the experience. Because Safra's mother is a drug addict and an alcoholic, she's often in dangerous situations. She either travels with her mother to and from Chicago to deal drugs, or she stays home while her mother travels to and from Chicago to deal drugs. And so she's left alone, and her mom doesn't make arrangements for her very often, and so she's neglected. And children like this are very frequently victims of sexual abuse, and Safra is no different. Victims of sexual abuse. 26% of sexual abuse victims are between the ages of 12 and 14. So in this book, she's 12 years old most of the book, and that is absolutely intentional. The fact that she comes from a home of domestic violence is absolutely intentional. She is made to represent these kids. 18.4% of sexual abuse victims are between the ages of 9 and 11. These are frequent ages of reports. Combined, this means 44.4% of victims report between the ages of 9 and 14. Before I start reading this, I just want to clarify why I'm choosing the passages I am. So, as I have no idea as audience members how many of you have backgrounds of abuse and trauma. It's shocking generally to me to find out. I just assume everybody's okay. And it turns out that a lot of y'all in this room have been abused or have been raped or mistreated, a lot of you. But so when we don't have that background, or sometimes even if we do, we tend to hear these stories about how the parents treated the kids. And there are some pretty dark stories of how kids are treated, and they're true. And we hear them and we're like, take those kids away, because we hear the worst part of it. And remember, I said the truth is gritty. True narrative, true experience. Even those parents who are really, really terrible, they mostly changed a lot of diapers still. They bonded to their children, a lot of them. And so it was also important to me to represent to you, and in this book, why she loves her mother, why she craves her mother's attention, why she wants to be with her. So with that in mind, I'm going to read this passage. On my 12th birthday, my mom took me for a short trip to the mall. In 1991, the mall was the coolest place to be, and I always felt extra cool strutting up to the doors with her. She was stylish and pretty, and people usually thought she was my older sister. She wore a tight pleather jacket that hugged her tiny hourglass frame. Out of the bottom peeked a few inches of short blue jean skirt. Rain had just let up, and her high heels click-clacked as she strode across the slick sidewalk. We headed into the mall through the large glass entrance nearest the food court and the arcade. We skipped the food court, and she marched me straight down the steps to the arcade, where she fed bills into the machine in exchange for fistfuls of quarters. What are we doing? I asked. I don't really like video games that much, and she knew that. You'll see, she said with a grin that implied she had something up her sleeve. But you said we only have a little while, I whined. Hush, and come on now. She walked on purposefully while I followed behind. We went back upstairs and down the large walkway leading to the main shopping area. Along the way, I peered around looking for clues as to what she might have in store. In the center of one plaza area, she stopped at a bouncy ball vending machine and put in quarter after quarter. Grab 'em, she told me, cranking the dial on the machine. When my fists and hers were both so full we were dropping balls all over the place, she took off toward the exit, throwing fistfuls in the air behind her. I caught on and did the same, running full speed to catch up. Just before I got to the doors, I stopped and turned. In that moment, there were balls suspended in the air of all sizes and colors. Pink and blue and yellow dots glowed in the light, airy space at staggered heights from anywhere from 25 feet down to the ground. They were bouncing off of every smooth surface of the large, high-ceilinged walkway, stone walls, hard-tiled floors, glass storefronts, colors flitting everywhere. It was amazing. I stepped outside after her, letting the doors shut behind me with all that magic still bouncing around like a racing heartbeat. I laughed aloud and chased her back to the car. But that wasn't the end of our day together. From the mall, we went to the grocery store where my mom sprung for 3 different half-gallons of ice cream and a name-brand frozen cheese pizza, my favorite. When we got home, my mom played game after game of cards with me. We played Go Fish and War and 21. We laughed, and then I ate until I almost puked. When I yawned and said I was ready for bed, my mom smiled warmly. After I'd tucked myself under the covers, she appeared in my doorway. "Birthday's not over yet," she said, and handed me a small box. I tore open the paper and lifted the lid. Inside, there was a necklace with a pendant from the art museum we'd visited in Chicago. It was a broken piece of glass from the exhibit I'd seen and liked so much. The rough places on the shard had been smoothed out so it wouldn't cut you. "I know our life's pretty rough sometimes," she said. "I love you, though." "Thank you," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I know, my girl," she told me and left the room. I wore it from that day on. My mom was the best. I never wanted that day to end. I could be with my mom forever, eating ice cream and having adventures. But that wasn't going to be our life. I didn't have forever left with my mom. At least not living with her. I had less than a year. I didn't know that yet, though. I had no idea as I pulled the covers up to my chin. The rain started back up, just in time to block out all the noise in our lives and lull me to sleep. The sounds of fights and drunks were long gone. I had rain. The smells of urine and whiskey blocked out by pizza and ice cream, and in my mind's eye, I didn't see the bullet hole or the cracked plaster walls. I saw a future filled with bouncy balls and a beautiful necklace. I didn't read the part because it's very long, but in a previous scene, she goes to Chicago with her mom on a drug run and is left alone for quite a while. And then on each of the drug runs, her mom takes her somewhere, and she takes her to an art museum. And Suffer really falls in love with art, and that's one of the things that saves her. So this is the awkward part of the conversation for me. If you are interested in this project, here's the kind of list of things that you can do. You can buy a book, obviously. Most or a lot of you have already done that. You can also review the book after you read it. Reviews and the number of reviews and the average of the reviews are huge in getting people to notice the book. So please do that. You can share your review after you do it on Facebook. Most people decide what to read based on what somebody recommended to them. It's all word of mouth. It's like most other things. And then if you have a book club, by all means, recommend it to your book club. I'm happy to talk with book clubs. And the other thing you can do, if you want to buy copies, you can buy copies to donate to. My goal, and I don't, as sales come in, then most of the money is going right back into promotion and spending money to buy books to send them out to reviewers and contests and all that kind of stuff. But if you buy copies and want to donate them to residential treatment facilities, juvenile detention facilities, foster parent organizations, those are all great places to get books into the hands of the people who really need these stories. And then there was something else. Oh, go into your local library, please, and request that they purchase a copy of the book. So libraries are huge. They're free. Everybody loves to read free stuff. I do. I'm not supposed to say that as an author. I'm supposed to convince you to buy my book. I totally don't buy books like ever. I think that's about all I've got. So this talk has been The Power of Stories, and I will take questions now. Yeah. Sure. So the question is there something that I really want people to take away, like an idea, a notion, a feeling? And yes, there absolutely is. When I looked at the kids that I worked with, I could see their strengths. And we would staff kids on a weekly basis. We had half days on Thursdays at one of my jobs, and we would talk about the kids. And we would always start with strengths, and I think that's a really valuable exercise if you work with children, is to start with their strengths and think about what are they really good at. Because we're a literate society, and we tend to look at whether you can sit still in class and be good and nice and read and write. And if you don't fit that, then it's harder for the adults to see what they need to see about you, and it's harder for you to see what you need to see about you. So I think what I really wanted was to say, yes, all of this is authentically true. There is the grit of life for all of us, including kids in treatment. And there's also tremendous hope and a lot of skill. Safra is a profoundly strong person. She's an honest person. I mean, she does some lying. She does some lying. But she's strong, she's a leader, and she's a survivor. And these kids are survivors. They're really, a lot of us wouldn't be able to, like if we were 17, we were talking about this earlier today. I know two people, one who lived in her car for about a year so that she could finish and graduate from high school without being a born-again Christian, to live with her foster family that would only allow her to live with them if she was a born-again Christian for them. And she was like, well, I haven't, she had the integrity to say, I'm not going to do that because that's a lie, but I'm going to finish high school and I'm going to live in my car to do it. And I have another friend who, from the time she was in middle school, lived in a storage unit. She had a hot plate, and I have no idea how she pulled that off, but those are phenomenal survival skills. So I think what I hope people will take away is that, yes, the grit is true and it's dark, and we should know about it. We should bring it into light. We should not be ashamed of our own grit. And there's tremendous strength and hope in overcoming that. So hopefully that worked out. It's kind of a lofty goal, so y'all let me know how it went. If you want to purchase a copy, please do. If you just want to donate money to have me donate copies, I'm happy to do that. I'll take your money. This book has a long road ahead of it to that, so I'll take any help I can get on the way. And I am so, so grateful that you all came. This was so much work, and it's a huge milestone in my life, and I'm just really, really happy that I get to celebrate with you all. So thank you.